On June 25th, KR received the first patch of the summer roadmap, which included a huge rework of support classes. So today, let's examine those changes. Let's look at changes in the attack power buff formula. So if you look at the old final attack power formula, it accounted for 15% of the support's basic attack power, and there was a separate 6% multiplier at the end. So they changed this, and now it's just 22% of the support's basic attack power. They removed that 6% multiplier at the end. And what this means is that the value of support gearing went up. So things like attack power buff efficiency lines on rings, the value of that has gone up. Main stat, weapon power, those things that are factored into basic attack power, the value of that went up. And then also other sources of direct basic attack power increases, such as gems and 9-7 stone. The value of that just all went up. And now with these changes, it's also the case that, according to KR research, attack power buff efficiency and allied damage increase lines on your rings are pretty much equal. So if you have to make a choice, basically go for the cheaper option is what I'd say. So like if you're wondering whether you should buy high, low, mid, low, high, just go for the cheaper option. Also, one thing to note, and this is a topic that is brought up on a daily basis on my streams. Basic attack power is different from attack power. So basic attack power is something that is based on your main stat and your weapon power. The equation is on the screen. And that is what affects the efficiency of your attack power buffs as a support. Higher basic attack power means stronger buffs. Now, if you have anything that increases attack power, not basic attack power, it does nothing for you as a support. It does nothing. Things like attack power on your accessories or elixir or anything engraving wise, such as adrenaline and ether predator, those things do nothing for you as a support. The only thing you should be caring about as a support is basic attack power, which basically means that you should care about main stat and weapon power. I know this is confusing, but just if you're playing support, make sure that you don't make the mistake of trying to increase your attack power thinking that'll do anything. It does absolutely nothing. Now let's look at changes made to support identity buff efficiency. So they reworked all the support alignment trees. So now all the main nodes on the 4th row increase base identity buff value by 20%. For instance, on Paladin and Artist and also Valkyrie, the base value used to be 10%. If you have fully spec'd into the 4th row main nodes, then that 10% becomes a 12%. And I've provided some examples on screen in terms of how these changes affect your final damage multipliers on Paladin and Artist, assuming you have 650 spec, 15% ally damage increase from accessories and all, level 10 damage gem, and then you're also using T-skill, which is an additive component. So for instance, Paladin goes from 31.32% to 35.29%. Note that Artist spec scaling also changed. It used to be 0.38, now it's 0.42, so you get that additional benefit. On Bard, things are a bit different because our 3-bubble buff is a 15% base value instead of 10%. And so the 20% increase makes it a 3% buff instead of a 2% buff. Now I'm having trouble figuring out how that 3% factors into the damage buff equation. Basically because my test results are different, going from week 1 to week 2. Basically on week 1 it seemed like Major Chord was an additive buff that did not benefit from spec scaling or gems. But the results on week 2 show that it fully benefits from everything, and so it's still a mystery as to what Smoggy wants to do with Bard. It seems like they did some sort of stealth patch, and I'm not exactly sure what the correct equation should be, so I'll put this on a hold for now. So basically we'll have to wait for a final verdict from Smallgate. Now let's look at changes to Engravings, starting with Awakening, which now provides a 6% cooldown reduction, additional cooldown reduction to your Awakening if you have Relic books fully read. Now this is a really nice buff that adds value to reading Awakening books. It also allows you to venture potentially a bit more into spec stat, with less punishment in terms of losing a bit on your Awakening cooldowns. Drops of Ether was reworked, so now it spawns 2 balls instead of 1 ball. So one can only be taken by you and one can only be taken by one of your party mates. There is also an undocumented change. So for the Ethers that spawn for yourself, 2 of them have different effects. So the Power Ether, instead of increasing your attack power, and heals you for a bit. And the Crit Ether is changed to a Stagger Ether, which increases your stagger values the same amount as it would have for a crit. So for instance, instead of increasing your crit values by 20%, it will increase your stagger by 20%. Credits for this discovery goes out to Portia. So the value and consistency of drops of ether has gone up by a lot, especially since you can no longer accidentally pick up the ethers that should be going to the DPSs. All in all, you'll be able to take drops of ether as one of your engravings in even more scenarios than before, and you'll be able to reap even more benefits. Note that this also makes an Awakening Drops of Ether ability stone the best value. It was already the case before, and it is even more the case now. So unless you're aiming for a budget Awakening 10 stone, trying to cut in 9-7 out of Awakening and drops provides highest value for party damage increase. Now for Explosive Expert, we have an interesting change. Relic Explosive Expert provides up to a 20% chance to not consume an explosive, which means that potentially you can throw an infinite amount of dark bombs. More realistically though, it means that you'll be able to throw 8 or 9 bombs per raid. Now of course, Explosive Expert is a very situational pick since you will only get full value out of it in long raids, so progs, hell modes, and races. But this will definitely be a valuable pick going into the Kazros race, so we'll see how it is used there. Now let's look at the Paladin Enlightenment tree. We have some new elements, and some elements have been moved to other nodes. First off, the status immunity on identity usage that was on the first node of the main tree has been moved over to being an inherent part of identity usage. So it's no longer a part of the alignment tree. Instead, we got Holy Wave as a new Z skill for Paladin. This is a skill that's on a 40-second base cooldown. It can take a cooldown gem. It provides push immunity to your own self, and it provides a 10% shield to your entire party for 6 seconds with a 24-meter AoE. So extra push immunity, extra shielding, absolutely fantastic. The 30% extra radius on Holy Aura has been moved over to the third main node, and this allows Paladins who are still gearing up to fully benefit from this QOL without specking too deep into the alignment tree. On the fourth main node, we still have that 75% aura activation and 70% payback on aura cancel, but we also now have 20% increased aura buff efficiency, which makes your buff stronger. We now have the Z skill fill up 10% of your piety every time you use it. Note that this also applies while Holy Aura is active, so it can effectively extend its duration. Now couple it up with the new side node option that reduces your Z skill cooldown by 0.25 seconds every time you cast yellow skills while having Aura active. The base cooldown of Z skill is 40 seconds, and with Full Swift, Relic Magic Stream, Elixir, and cooldown gem, you can reduce it down to 16 seconds, which is then further reduced the more you spam yellow skills. This means that you can use the Z skill twice per aura, and this extends aura duration by 20%, so a bit over 3 seconds. This is what revolutionizes Paladin gameplay, turning him into a really spammy class if you choose to play towards the ceiling for more identity uptime. Basically, by using T, Z, and the 2 attack power buffs, which now also provide piety during Holy Aura, you can extend buff duration by around 50%, so the 16-second buff becomes something close to 24 seconds, and this is without even mentioning Awakening and Stimulant usage. Note that the branding side nodes have been changed for all supports. For Paladin, it is a flat 8 seconds at all levels. The side nodes now offer brand power for additional levels beyond the first, so the bulk of their value lies in the first level. Now let's look at Paladin changes beyond the alignment tree. Holy Aura now inherently has status immunity. Light Shock brand duration got bumped from 6 to 7 seconds. Note that the value of Light Shock went up, not only because of increased brand duration, but also because of its low cooldown and how it can interact with the Z skill in reducing its cooldown during Aura. Also, with how Paladin became spammy, the process immunity allows you to spam mindlessly with less risk in terms of the skill being cancelled. It is also the case that Light Shock is a directional skill, unlike SOJ, which is positional, making it somewhat easier to spam. Of course, you can still use SOJ and benefit from its truly forgiving brand duration to cooldown ratio, the range, and CNJ applications. This one will be up to your preferences and the raid situation as well. Note also that Holy Explosion value went down because of its high cooldown. Wrath of God now has inherent process immunity and also has a push immunity tripod option, which sacrifices the 20% extra range. Heavenly Blessings also has inherent process immunity. For both skills, the piety tripod has been changed such that you get a flat 5% piety gain that also procs during Holy Aura. Note that Spec Stat or Wealth Rune do not affect this 5%, so you can kind of explore other options instead of Wealth, such as Focus or Quick Recharge. Holy Protection now provides more shielding, 22% instead of 20. Note that both attack buffs and Holy Protection now need to be at level 14 in order to unleash their max potential. The robust protection tripod on the second row of Holy Protection has been changed such that you no longer lose duration on the shield, but the shield value itself has been lowered. This is a good change though, that potentially allows you to use this tripod in more situations. Awakening and Hyper Awakening shield values have been bumped up from 80% to 100, and this puts Paladin's Awakening at the same level as those of the other supports, so you no longer have to feel betrayed when you're doing the Venus Flytrap mech in Echidna Gate 2. Overall, Paladin takes a huge W from this patch. He feels modernized with all the changes to piety gain. He enjoys higher floor value with Heavenly Blessing having process immunity, Wrath of God having process/push immunity, and Z-Skill giving push immunity. What's great is that if you're playing towards the floor, you can mostly play the way you used to and enjoy all these extra benefits. Paladin now also has a higher ceiling with how its identity buff efficiency and duration went up. This comes at a cost though, with higher APM and increased difficulty. There are also subtle gameplay nuances that are difficult to capitalize on when striving for the ceiling. In terms of skill set, you can still use a 2 blue skill setup if having double counters or high burst stagger is rewarding, but you can also aim for the ceiling by replacing one of the blue skills with Holy Area for more piety gain and an additional yellow skill to spam during Aura. Now let's look at bards, starting with Enlightenment. Notable changes are the introduction of chords and major minor chords, which I'll discuss in a bit. The side nodes have been changed so that you can benefit from the 8% max mana just by investing 2 points into that node, and an 8-second brand on casting Z by investing another 2. Let's check out the chord mechanism. I wasn't sure to call this chord or harmony, but I'll stick to chord for now. You can read through the text for more detail, but basically using bubbles or major minor chords gives you stacks, and when you reach 7, your stacks are converted into perfect chords, which benefit your next 7 normal skills used, reducing their cooldown by 10% and refunding 50% mana. Now the benefits of this is that it helps solve mana issues, and it reduces your cooldown, which means more uptime, more Serenade, more shield, DR, and utility. This also gives more of an argument for Spec Bard since it helps you hedge the risks of increased cooldowns. There are problems though in the sense that it is hard to keep track of chord stacks during raids, which makes it hard to maximize their value. They also keep altering your cooldowns, which can make buff uptime management somewhat confusing. One other minor issue is that you cannot overstack on chords, so if you are doing a stimulant combo, you'll have to waste a lot of stacks. Now, what are these major minor chords? Well, after using any amount of bubbles, you gain a 4-second window to activate either major or minor chords, so you get a choice. Major chord provides an additional damage buff to your party, and minor chord refunds 15% of bubbles spent. Whichever you choose, you also gain a 25% mana regen buff, whose duration depends on how many bubbles were spent. Major or minor is a choice between burst and uptime, and I think the play for now is to use major chords during damage windows, where DPSs would use Adrophins, and minor chords otherwise. If you don't want to overthink it, you can just use either of them and they will benefit you one way or the other. Major and minor chords basically function just like potions do, so you can activate them while casting other skills or even during spacebar. Note that in the current patch, major chord seems to fully benefit from spec scaling and Serenade damage gem, which was not true when I did testings on the previous week, so I'm kind of waiting for a sort of final verdict from Smallgate as to which is the correct formula. The pros of this new mechanism is that it increases your agency as a bard, allowing you to strategically shift back and forth between burst and uptime while also solving your mana issues. The cons are that it can complicate your gameplay, and that rapidly chaining buffs and heals can become awkward because of the 0.5 second wait time before being able to cast major/minor chord. That is because you have to cast major/minor chord before being able to use your next set of bubbles. Let's look at other bard changes. Identity usage now has inherent status immunity. Sound Shock got a 2-second brand duration increase, so on full hit, the brand lasts for around 7 seconds. The base cooldown was also increased by 2 seconds, but if you account for cooldown reduction, the practical cooldown went up by around 1 second. This of course is not a bad thing, since it allows you to cast it less often for pretty much the same results, although you do lose out on the potential cumulative stagger. Serenade value and mana cost went up to account for the increased cooldown, so Serenade gain on Soundshock is sorta net neutral with this. Overall, these changes allow you to really use Soundshock as a solo brand choice, since the brand duration versus cooldown ratio is now pretty lenient. It has always been a great utility choice with its range, stagger, multi-hit, with how it helps maintain and stack up Luminary and Magic Stream, and how you can keep maintaining brand uptime regardless of volatile boss movements across the map. Stigma is pretty much dead because they effectively nerfed the Serenade gain by half, and although the brand duration was buffed, it pales in comparison to other brand or Serenade gain options. You can kind of fit it into your build, but I'd say not really. Sonatina Serenade gain was nerfed by 12%, but the brand duration went up from 5 to 10 seconds. This allows you to use Sonatina as a proper solo brand option. It has a destruction point, it has a bit of stagger, it gives Serenade, it's great. The only downfalls are that it does not have process muti, and its range is somewhat short, but depending on the situation, this can be your go-to brand. Note that solo branding with Sonatina is only really reliable on high Swift, full Swift builds, since lower Swift means longer cooldowns and hence more risk and uptime. Buckshot received an insane 310% buff to Serenade gain, so now it is almost a core skill on Bard with how it can serve so many functions including countering, Serenade gain, backup push immunity, stagger, and destruction. Prelude was heavily nerfed, minus 32% Serenade gain. You can still use it, I still do, but it is no longer a core choice on Bard builds. Soundholic got some really interesting changes. It gives 12% more Serenade at base, turn rate was improved, and the mana tripod now fills 0.5% mana per tick to you and whoever in your party is hit by it. Soundholic applies a total of 15 ticks with the second row tripod, so 7.5% of mana filled per use. The Serenade tripod on the third row doubles up the cast speed now, making Soundholic way more practical to use. Overall, this skill will be less used for stagger, it will be used more for Serenade gain and to solve any remaining mana issues. Over time, the Serenade gain on Soundholic is pretty much the same as the current Prelude, so a lot of bards are using at least one of the two skills, if not both. The problem with Soundholic is that, while it did gain QOLs to its skill motion, it is still somewhat awkward to use since you have to maintain your mouse pointer in the direction where you want to cast it. Still, it can be a great choice in any build. Note Bundle got a brand duration increase. You can consider using this as a brand choice, but I'm not really sure about it. It does have some potential, so maybe food for thought. Harp also got a brand duration increase, so it will be even more reliable as a branding option. Heavenly Tune finally received process immunity, so it's now the most broken skill in the game. Guardian Tune DR was increased from 30 to 32% as if it was not broken already. Note that you need to put Sonic Vibration, Heavenly Tune, and Guardian Tune at level 14 to reap max benefits. Bard takes a big W with this patch, although I will reserve some judgment because I still need to figure out how they're gonna factor Major Chord into the buff formula. A lot of Bard's issues were dealt with since they gave her solo branding, fixed her mana issues, and gave Heavenly Tune process immunity. She gained more cooldown reduction from Chord stacks, and she has an even higher ceiling with Major Chord. She has a lot of build diversity with 3 to 4 choices for solo branding, and now Soundholic joining the list of skills you can actively use. You can keep using double branding, although it's less appealing. You can experiment with some funky skill setups, and on top of that, it has become a bit more reasonable to allocate more spec over Swift. So pretty much, no two Bard builds will be alike. There are some issues with chord stacks and major minor chords, but overall it's a huge win for Bard. Now, last but not least, artist changes starting with Enlightenment. So first off, her one bubble buff got moved to the first row, and for her fourth row node, she gained a huge 20% increase to her Falling Moon buff efficiency, along with the new red ball mechanism, which I will explain shortly. Her brand side node is now a flat 6 seconds at all skill levels. Note that this is shorter than the 8 seconds that Bard and Paladin have on their side nodes, but this is to compensate for artists being able to apply branding not just through Zcast but also through X, and for her having what is likely the best branding option out of all supports in drawing orchids. Now, the side node for shield on Falling Mooncast was removed. I guess Smogate thought she had too much shielding capability, which is true, but the problem lies in what she received instead, which is the quirky ball mechanism. Now, let's take a look at these new ball mechanisms. I've named them Red Ball and Quirky Ball for the purposes of this overview. Technically, red ball would translate to ink wash orb, but I'll call it red ball for simplicity. So you gain harmony stacks for using bubbles, and after using 8 bubbles, the next falling moon spawns a red ball that you can pick up by pressing G, reduces your current cooldown on normal skills by 15%, and provides a 6 seconds falling moon buff. If you already had falling moon applied, the duration is extended by another 6. For the other mechanism, when you place heal balls through Rising Sun, you have a 20% chance to spawn a quirky ball, and if you pick it up, it provides you with 0.5 bubbles. Now, these mechanisms are pretty problematic. Quirky ball is pretty bad because it's RNG, and if you're not using a lot of heals, it becomes a waste of enlightenment points. And on no other support you're thinking, maybe I should remove points from this side node entirely. The red ball extends your falling moons by 6 seconds, which is kinda nice, but this can also exacerbate the issue of you getting too many bubbles relative to what you can spend. And of course, this problem already tends to happen when you're using Awakenings or Stimulant. Next, it's pretty hard to keep track of harmony stacks during a raid. It's hard to locate the buff icon on your bar, and it's hard to count the number of flowers on the lower right of your character. It's a new UI element. That is pretty and all, but because it's difficult to obtain information from it, it feels like a mistake in design. Another minor problem is that you also cannot gain harmony stacks beyond 8, so some naturally ends up getting wasted. Now, the 15% cooldown reduction on your normal skills from the red ball is great, but it's somewhat hard to maximize the value out of it because it only applies to your current remaining cooldowns. So you have to make sure to use skills as much as possible while checking the remaining duration on Falling Moon while trying to not waste bubbles by overstacking harmony. So it's a lot of things to think about, and on top of that, the floor tends to become messy with all the different balls that you spawn, heal balls, red balls, quirky balls, on top of drops of ether balls. The most glaring issue with these balls, however, is that just guards and repel interaction in More Doom take precedence over picking up the balls, and this tends to lead to accidents. Just last week, I was trying to pick up a red ball and I was forced to ride the repel in More Doom Gate 3, even though I was pretty far away from it. It's not just me too, there are several posts on Inven by people who have experienced the same issue and died. Now, I can totally see Smogate fixing some of these issues with artists, perhaps give her back her shield side node and fix her red ball, but we'll have to wait and see. Still, however, artists did gain a lot from this patch. Hopper, One Stroke, Upper Stroke, Pouncing Tiger, and Awakening all got improvements in their animations. Most notably, you can now immediately move after finishing jumping on Hopper, and this is huge since Artist is most vulnerable while casting this skill. A lot of artists, including myself, were using Galewind on Hopper to mitigate the risks, but now Wealth Rune has more of an argument towards it. Sunwell now provides 25% mana, up from 18%. What I'm assuming here is that they wanted to accentuate Artist's strength in providing mana, and they wanted her to really be able to use the Mana Furnace node. Door of Illusion's shield value went from 15% to 17%, and note that you now need Sunsketch, Sunwell, and Door of Illusion to be at level 14 to reap max benefits from those skills. Drawing Orchids now has Process Immunity, and so now it's unequivocally the best branding skill across all 4 supports. And Falling Moon spec scaling went from 0.38 to 0.42 on top of the 20% buff efficiency increase from her alignment tree, making her buffs even more potent. Overall, for artists, these are huge wins as long as they can polish some of her new mechanisms. Her floor value and consistency went up with all her improvements to her animations. Her identity buff value went up by a lot. She provides even more mana through Sunwell, and her carpet is now process immune. Let's just wait and see what they do in terms of after service. One more thing to note about this patch is that they changed the buff icons for supports. So now you only need to memorize 4 buff icons, which are for attack power buff, identity buff, T-skill damage buff, and T-skill hyper buff. The idea is great for the DPSs especially, since they no longer need to memorize a different set of icons for each different support. Now the problem though is legibility. It has become really difficult to spot your buff icons and readily distinguish them from others. Part of it is because of how the order of buff icons keeps changing during the course of a fight, but this was less of an issue before because you could find the icons at a glance. The issue right now is that the icons have lost their legibility. They are really confusing color-wise because they have a similar color scheme to other icons, especially the yearning ones. And this is really problematic because you can't use the buff bar anymore as a reliable source of information for managing buff uptimes. It's been 2 weeks into this patch and I'm still having issues myself, and I'm not alone as there have been a lot of complaints on Invin as well. I really hope they go and fix this issue in an upcoming patch, but for now we'll have to wait. Now that's it for June support rework overview. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised by most of these changes. The value of gearing up on supports went up with changes to Engravings, Enlightenment, and the attack buff formula, making it more interesting to invest in supports than before. And with the value of identity buffs going up, supports who are geared to the brim can toy around by putting a bit more points into spec over Swift. Now that was true before, but it is even more so the case now. Floor value went up across the board, likely in prep for personal meter and for the Kazaros race. And it will likely be easier to learn how to play support, but it will be harder to master the craft, as they added a lot of nuances and depth on the ceiling side of things. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions, feel free to ask on stream. And thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.